Two of the most interesting figures in American history. And certainly, if we're talking about alternative American history or conspiratorial American history or the kind of American history that we all love to talk about here on Odyssey Radio Network and our great terrestrial stations, that would be two of the most interesting fellows in history, really, of any definition. Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard. And even more interesting is the history that those two gentlemen have together. And that's going to be our focus here tonight on Unindoctrinate as we close out the week and get you into your weekend. This is Unindoctrinate. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, bringing you some power into your midnight hour. And we're going to talk about Jack Parsons. We're going to talk about L. Ron Hubbard. We're going to talk about what they did together, speculate about what they may have done together, which is very, very interesting. And we'll try to draw some lessons from their lives. We'll try to bring some cautionary tales to both of their lives, try to learn something from them. And I think when it's all said and done, we're going to have a fascinating discussion over this next hour. And we're very, very happy to have the folks from Verve CBD oil and from Hero Soap sponsoring our program. If you need help in anything like anxiety, sleep, diet, those types of things, go to Verve, go to the jeffreydaugherty.com website, click on the Verve logo. If you want to let freedom clean and you want to smell manly or womanly and be very clean and refreshed and use organic products made by veterans and still supporting veterans, go to the American flag Hero Soap logo. Hero Soap, let freedom clean, and Verve CBD. We will get you not only smelling good, but we'll get you feeling good. Let's first of all look at Jack Parsons. Now, Jack Parsons, sort of an enigmatic fellow. There's a lot known about him, and there's a lot that we don't know about him. But I found some interesting parallels with Jack Parsons, and I think some interesting things that you're going to say, wow, I never noticed that. Wow, that's pretty amazing. Wow, that's something else. And I want to bring these to you because I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Jack Parsons was named John Whiteside Jack Parsons. I don't understand that. John F. Kennedy. Why is he called Jack Kennedy? I don't get how John becomes Jack. How can Jack be a nickname for John? It takes just as long to say Jack as it does to say John. There's exactly the same amount of letters, exactly the same amount of syllables. A nickname's supposed to be easier to say. So I just don't understand Jack being a nickname for John. It's like George being a nickname for Jeff. Makes no sense to me. If you can explain to me why Jack is a nickname for John, I'd be glad to hear it. And I have a feeling the answer is just because. Well, there you go. Now, I'm not going to tell you what he was born, what his birth name was until a second from now or a few minutes from now. But he was an American rocket engineer and a rocket propulsion researcher. He was a chemist, and he was a Thelemite occultist. A Thelemite occultist is a person that delves in Thelema, which was the religion, kind of bastardized magic, self-styled magic of Aleister Crowley, and he built it into a religion, some good, some bad. He was also associated with the California Institute of Technology, the famous Caltech. Parsons was one of the principal founders of both the Jet Propulsion Laboratories and the Aerojet Engineering Corporation. In other words, Jack Parsons was, in reality, the father of NASA. He was the father of U.S. rocketry. Jack Parsons was the rocket man, and I also call L. Ron Hubbard the rocket man for reasons that we will look at. So that's what this is, Rocket Men. Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard here tonight on Unindoctrinated. Now, I'm also the artist known as the Christian Whistleblower over on YouTube, so I encourage you to go over to my YouTube channel. Just go on YouTube, type in Christian Whistleblower, type in Jeffrey Daugherty, type in Big Fat Smelly Jerk, and they'll pull up, not really that last one, but most people say it's true. It's really not. And you'll pull up my channel. Please go ahead and subscribe there. We'd love to have you. Now, he invented the first rocket engine to use what they call solid fuel propellant. So then, before that, you had to have liquid gases, which are super duper highly flammable, very heavy, take up a lot of space. So there's no way that there could have been rocketry as we know it without Jack Parsons inventing the castable composite rocket propellant, or in other words, solid rocket fuel. And he pioneered the advancement of both liquid fuel and solid fuel rockets. So obviously a really, really smart guy was John Whiteside, a.k.a. Jack Parsons. But let me show you something, and then let me tell you what his real name was. And you tell me if I'm reading into things or not, because to me, this is really, really interesting. Look at this dude. Take a look at him. Notice his goatee, his hair, his face. Does he remind you of anybody? What about if I told you that his given name, you're not going to believe this, but his given name was Marvel Whiteside Parsons. Probably Marvel, but Marvel. Think Marvel Comics. Think Rockets. Who does he look like? Can you really sit there with a straight face and tell me that Tony Stark, Iron Man, in the Marvel movie universe is not based on Jack Parsons? Look at that face. Look at that beard. Folks, that what you see right there is the forerunner of Tony Stark of Iron Man Marvel fame. I'm telling you, that's where they got it from. And I don't think you can look at that and disagree with me. I think that's fascinating. Jack Parsons was the original Iron Man. Jack Parsons was the original Rocket Man. I'm sure of it. And the Marvel comics, Marvel, Whiteside, Parsons, come on, folks. It's an obvious thing for me. So, and it makes sense. I mean, Rocket Man, if you know the Tony Stark, or Iron Man, you know the Tony Stark story. He's an inventor. He creates all of these crazy rocket type things, advanced technology type things, and that's who Jack Parsons was. Jack Parsons was Iron Man, and they built this character on Jack Parsons. There is no doubt about it. I think not only in my mind, but in any objective mind, because it just makes way too much sense, and it makes this a whole lot more fun already, ladies and gentlemen. But let's talk some more about Mr. Parsons. And it's interesting, and we start talking about tie-ins between Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard, the two gentlemen that we're talking about tonight. Parsons was inspired by his own words. In his own words, he was inspired to develop his interest in rocketry when in his childhood he had a great love for science fiction literature. Do you think that L. Ron Hubbard, who became one of the great science fiction writers, also had a fascination with science fiction literature? Of course he did. Of course he had a fascination for science fiction literature. Let me just look at something right now. Comparative ages, L. Ron Hubbard, Jack Parsons. Let's see if it's possible that Parsons read Hubbard. Let's see. When was Parsons born? I got to do this the hard way, ladies and gentlemen. Got to do this the hard way. They just don't make it easy for a researcher these days. Jack Parsons' birth date. Jack Parsons' birthday. Jack Parsons' birthday was 1914. And when was L. Ron Hubbard birthday? L. Ron Hubbard was born in 1911. So it's very doubtful. It's possible, but doubtful that Parsons was motivated by Hubbard science fiction writing, because Hubbard wasn't writing science fiction when Parsons was a child. But see, this is how you study things, ladies and gentlemen. This is how you do research. You ask these questions, you follow the rabbit trails, and when the rabbit trails come up with cool stuff, you share it. If they don't come up with cool stuff, we usually don't share it. But that time you got to see a little bit of live research. And that's what most of the people that you listen to on the radio, on YouTube, don't do. They decide what they believe. They go out and they do what's called a confirmation bias research. They look for everything to prove what they're saying, but they don't look at everything, especially if it doesn't agree with what they're saying. But we're not like that here. We give you the true scoop. So, Parsons, motivated as a child by science fiction literature, became the foremost leader in American rocketry, developed the solid fuel rocket, father of NASA, no doubt about it. And interestingly enough, in 1939, Parsons had a flirtation with Marxism, communism. Can you believe that? That's interesting that this guy, with all of this knowledge, with all of this insight, would have looked at communism, Marxism. That is really weird to me. And what's even more weird to me is that he went from a brief involvement with Marxism in 1939 to becoming affiliated with Thelema, Crowley's new religious movement. So that seems to me quite a stretch between Marxism, Marxist communism, and Thelema, but that's the path that Jack Parsons trod, and it's definitely an interesting one. And in 1941, with his first wife, Helen, Jack Parsons joined the Agape Lodge, which was the California branch of the Thelemite Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO. And soon thereafter, Crowley installed him, Jack Parsons, as the leader, replacing Wilfred Talbot Smith in 1942. And Parsons ran the lodge from his mansion on Orange Grove Avenue. And finally, 2 years later, because of his involvement in the occult and his involvement in OTO, his involvement in magical workings, which we'll talk about, he was actually expelled from JPL. From what he created, he was kicked out. And again, you start looking at parallels between Tony Stark and Jack Parsons. It's very, very interesting. So he got expelled due to, quote unquote, having an infamous reputation and hazardous workplace conduct. So who knows what Jack Parsons was doing to get himself fired from the companies that he created. I mean, he was the father of this entire branch of technology, and he got fired. That just goes to show they can always replace you, ladies and gentlemen. Now, and I found that out the hard way one time, but that's okay. Maybe more than one time, if you count relationships. So let's get to connecting. Well, let's just lightly connect Parsons and Hubbard, and then we'll talk about Hubbard as an individual. There was something called the Babylon Working. It has nothing to do with Babylon as you think it, but the Babylon Working was a series of magical ceremonies and rituals performed between January and March 1946 by Jack Parsons and a fellow named L. Ron Hubbard. And what they were trying to do, ladies and gentlemen, what they were trying to do, cousins, is to manifest, bring into this world an incarnation of what they considered to be the archetypical divine. And that was what they referred to as Babylon. So they're trying to bring the perfect archetypal female into this world. And that's what they were doing January, February for at least 3 months. Very, very interesting. They might have brought something into this world a little more than they bargained for. So let's talk L. Ron Hubbard here for a moment. And before we do that, let me just remind you, if you have any type of debilitating injuries, if you have any type of chronic illness, if you're having problems with mobility, if you're having difficulties with your skin, with your hair, go to jeffreydaugherty.com. Click on the Stem Light logo. That is our stem cell partner. Miraculous stuff. You get 20% off when you click on that logo and mention the word heal. If you're a doctor and you want to incorporate stem cell therapy into your practice, because you know if you're a doctor how great it really is, well, you can work with Stem Light, and they're going to do great things for you, things that no other company can do because, well, they are they're partnered with the National Football League Alumni Association. So, doctor, you go to southernstem.com, use the code word HEAL, and they're going to do some tremendous things for you. And if you're a person, again, that wants to find out about stem cell therapy for themselves individually, go to my website, jeffreydaugherty.com, and click on the Stem Light logo. Use the same word HEAL, and you'll get that full 20% discount. Great people, great products, changing lives, because we're in the life-changing business, cousins, and that business is a booming, both on the medical front and on the spiritual front. So first of all, you'd be interested to know that L. Ron Hubbard stands for Lafayette Ronald Hubbard. And I don't know if there's two guys with two weirder names. Marvell Whiteside Jack John Parsons and Lafayette Ronald Hubbard. Wow, that's a pair of bookends for you right there, no doubt about it. And he was, of course, an American author of science fiction and fantasy stories. And we're going to stop right there for a minute because that's all that is applicable to his interactions with Parsons, at least at this point. So Parsons, self-styled, self-taught, well-educated, thought way outside the box on most things. Hubbard, let's talk about L. Ron Hubbard. Born in Nebraska, he spent a lot of his childhood in Montana, and then his dad was posted to the U.S. Navy base on Guam, and Hubbard traveled extensively all over Asia, all over the South Pacific, and he made it his business to talk to shaman, gurus, religious leaders, leaders of isms and anities, and Hubbard became a real student of comparative religion. And Hubbard also traveled across Europe extensively. So Hubbard traveled basically the whole world, talking to religious and spiritual and occult magical leaders of all stripes. And then Hubbard also had a high formal education background, very similar to Parsons. So they spoke the same language. And interestingly enough, L. Ron Hubbard was an officer in the United States Navy during World War II, and he commanded not one but two ships. Now, he was removed from command for what might be called erratic behavior, but one of the most fascinating stories of why he was removed from command, well, one, he was being a dummy, and they were firing missiles and torpedoes at an island off the coast of Mexico, and oops, I guess there might have been some people on there they didn't know about, and they were a little bit upset about getting torpedoes and missiles shot at their island. But hey, L. Ron didn't know they were there. You know, Captain Hubbard didn't know they were there, but at any rate, they didn't view that very kindly. But the other time he got removed as a commander of a ship, very, very interesting. He was on a ship off the coast of Oregon during World War II, ladies and gentlemen. and he exhausted his whole battery of depth charges when he was firing on what he claimed to be and what his crew also claimed to be a Japanese submarine. L. Ron Hubbard says he fired on a Japanese submarine in the coastal waters off of Oregon during World War II. Now, you can see why you don't want, if you're the military, some guy saying he fired on a Japanese sub off the coast of Oregon during a world war, but he claims he did. Many of his crew members confirmed that he did. Nevertheless, he was removed from command of that vessel, subsequently was injured and spent the last few months of his active duty service in a hospital being treated for a variety of injuries that he suffered in the line of duty. I'm inclined to believe, especially if you look at the work of Douglas Dietrich and some other folks, that Hubbard did in fact see a Japanese submarine off the coast of Oregon during World War II, and he was in fact firing upon a Japanese submarine, and for all we know, he could have been a hero, and he could have sunk the sub. And who knows what that sub was going to do? Was it going to pop off some missiles at Portland? Was it going to pop off some missiles at Seattle? Was it going to go down and destroy or pop off missiles at San Francisco? Who knows? So we very well may owe L. Ron Hubbard, naval commander, a note of thanks. But it's interesting, Hubbard's naval experience, Hubbard's travel, Parsons' rocketry experience, both of their common educations. It's not a real surprise that circumstances would have brought them together, and circumstances did bring them together. After Hubbard was out of the Navy, he found himself down in Parsons' neck of the woods. They ended up getting together, and they initially were working together in Thelema. In fact, it is said, and I've seen it in writing, that Parsons said that, and Parsons wrote this to Crowley. Parsons wrote a letter to Crowley saying that L. Ron Hubbard was the most thelemically minded individual he'd ever met. And that sets the stage for learning more about the Rocket Men, L. Ron Hubbard, Jack Parsons. When we get back from this break, we'll dive into what they did together and some stuff that they did together that we might have wished they didn't do together. It's certainly very, very interesting speculation. This is Unindoctrinate. I am Jeffrey Daugherty. We're talking tonight about Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard, the Rocket Men, and you will not want to miss the next segment. We're going to talk about occult workings. We're going to talk about the possible opening of portals and maybe, ladies and gentlemen, the initiation of the UFO era, not only in the United States, but in the world at large, by Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, the Rocket Men. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty. This is Unindoctrinate, and we'll be right back.